Most people look at the beautiful places around the world and think they're that way because of luck, a good location, great nature, and the right moment in history. But the truth is much more uncomfortable. Some of the most impressive destinations on the planet weren't built around harmony, comfort, or tourism. They were built around collision, around wars, around religions, around empires that met in the same place and couldn't exist together. These aren't places that survived despite their history. These are places that look the way they do because history has pressed, broken, and shaped them for centuries. And that's exactly why we call them beautiful today. When you visit destinations like these, you're not just looking at architecture and views, you're moving through spaces that were originally built with very clear purposes: control, survival, domination, or escape. In this video, we won't talk about the best photos and top 10 things to do. We'll talk about beautiful journeys born from conflict, and if you understand what exactly collided in these places, the experience becomes completely different, deeper, heavier, and far more memorable. Because when a place survives long enough, beauty is no longer decoration, it's a trace. Istanbul, the city that can't be calm. Istanbul isn't a city that developed. It's a city that has constantly been squeezed between two continents, between religions, between empires that had no choice but to collide right here. This isn't random geography, it's strategic inevitability. When you walk through the city today, you see mosques, churches, palaces, markets, ferries, and streets that seem to lead nowhere. But beneath this visual density sits a very simple logic. Istanbul has always been a place that must be held, not merely inhabited. Control of this city meant control of trade, armies, and movement between East and West. That's why its architecture isn't orderly. It's layered. That's why it doesn't have one center, but many. That's why the city never gives you a sense of completion. Each era added its layer without fully erasing the one before it. A Byzantine church becomes a mosque. An Ottoman palace looks out toward modern neighborhoods. The past wasn't restored, it was left to exist alongside the present. As a tourist, you feel this immediately. Istanbul isn't visited smoothly. It loads you. Distances are big, the rhythm is fragmented, the noise is constant. But that isn't a flaw, it's a result. A city that for centuries was a military, religious, and commercial stage cannot be light. And that's where the paradox comes in. The more you understand why Istanbul is the way it is, the more beautiful it starts to feel. Not as a picture, but as a living organism that never had the luxury of being calm. Beauty here isn't planned, it's a residue of survival. And this is the pattern that will start repeating. Fact: for centuries, Istanbul was the most fortified city in the world, and parts of its defensive walls were so effective, they stopped armies for more than 1,000 years until technology finally caught up. Berlin, the city that was cut in two. Berlin isn't a city whose history shaped slowly. It's a city that was interrupted, hard. After the war, the argument wasn't how to live together, but where exactly the border should run. And that border wasn't abstract. It was concrete, barbed wire, and watchtowers planted in the very heart of the city. When you move through Berlin today, much of the experience comes from what you can't see anymore. But that still defines the space. Streets that end oddly, squares that feel too open. The lack of a classic old center is because the city developed in parallel under two completely different systems. The history here isn't romantic, it's direct and heavy. Berlin was the capital of an empire, then a symbol of totalitarianism, and later the front line of the Cold War. And all of it happened not on the periphery, but inside everyday life. Homes are split by a wall, neighborhoods that didn't speak for decades. As a tourist, you feel it clearly. Berlin doesn't impress with classic beauty. It impresses with honesty, with the fact that it doesn't hide its scars. What makes it different is that the city doesn't try to cover up its tension. Instead of erasing it, it turned it into part of its identity. Museums, memorials, and empty spaces don't decorate the past. They let it weigh exactly as much as it should. And it doesn't lead you to one viewpoint where everything makes sense. It makes you assemble the story piece by piece, through neighborhoods, through contrasts, through the feeling that the city is still searching for its shape. And that's why the experience here isn't fast. Not because there's nothing to see, but because the city refuses to be simplified. Parts of the wall were left on purpose. The spaces weren't smoothed out. The city doesn't try to look finished, because its history was never like that. And that's exactly why Berlin works so powerfully. It doesn't sell you its past, it makes you move through it. Kyoto, the city that survived by not picking a side. If there's one place in Japan that shows conflict isn't always loud, it's Kyoto. Here, the clash wasn't between armies on a battlefield, but between power and legitimacy, between who rules and who has the right to rule. When people hear Japan, most imagine Tokyo, speed, neon, and the future. Kyoto, though, is the place that shows how this country chose not to erase its past, even when the world around it changed radically. For more than 1,000 years, Kyoto was Japan's capital and the home of the emperor, but real power often sat in the hands of samurai military governments. This is where symbol and control collided. The emperor and court stayed in Kyoto as tradition and legitimacy, while decisions came from elsewhere. That quiet but constant clash shaped the city in a way you can still feel today. That's why Kyoto doesn't impress with scale, but with control. Temples, palaces, and districts weren't built to demonstrate power, but to maintain balance. Spaces are arranged to guide movement, slow the pace, and impose rhythm. As a tourist, you don't feel it as a rule, but as an atmosphere, yet behind it sits a centuries-old political and cultural necessity. When Japan enters the modern era and the samurai system begins to collapse, key conspiracies, assassinations, and coups unfold in Kyoto, events that lead to the end of the feudal order. This wasn't a calm city that simply kept tradition. It was a center of tension that had to survive without falling apart. Today, you can feel it in everything. In the way temples coexist next to the modern city, in the lack of showiness, in the refusal of extremes. Kyoto didn't resist change, it filtered it. And that's why the experience here is so different from the rest of Japan. Not because it's older, but because it was preserved more consciously. Mini bonus fact. During World War II, Kyoto was deliberately spared from bombing because it was considered the cultural and historical heart of Japan, a decision without which the city wouldn't exist in this form today. Short transition forward, there are also places where the conflict wasn't between ideas or power, but between survival itself and disappearance, and it left marks directly in stone. Petra, when survival becomes architecture. Petra isn't a city that has to impress. It's a city that had to survive. Hidden between canyons and cliffs in the desert, this place wasn't chosen for the views, but for protection. If you don't know where to look, you simply won't see it. That was the advantage. Petra was the capital of the Nabateans, a people who controlled some of the most important trade routes between Arabia, Egypt, and the Mediterranean. Spices, incense, and wealth passed through here, making the city strategically valuable and constantly threatened. Conflict wasn't a choice. It was a constant risk. That's why the city is built inward, not outward. The facades we photograph today are only the face. Petra's real logic is in the systems behind them. Water channels, reservoirs, and tunnels that enabled life in the middle of a desert and under siege. Architecture here wasn't a symbol of power. It was a tool for controlling resources without which the city couldn't exist. As a traveler, you feel it the moment you enter. The long, narrow passage isn't just a dramatic entrance, it was a filter. A place that slows you down, limits you, and protects. And when the space suddenly opens, and you see the city, the effect isn't accidental, it was planned. Petra's story doesn't end with destruction, but with disappearance. When trade routes changed and the city lost its importance, it was gradually abandoned and forgotten by the world. Not because it was destroyed, but because it was no longer needed. And that's exactly what allowed Petra to survive almost intact for centuries. Today, its beauty comes from the same logic that once guaranteed its survival. This isn't a place created for show. This is a place where every line in the stone has a reason. Machu Picchu, when disappearance is strategy. Machu Picchu wasn't built to be found. That's the first thing that changes the way you perceive it. Set high in the Andes, far from the main roads and cities, it wasn't a center of display, but a place of controlled retreat. The Inca built an empire without writing, without the wheel, and without iron, but with an extraordinary understanding of terrain. Mountains weren't an obstacle, they were protection. Machu Picchu is part of that logic, a city that exists in sync with nature, but outside an enemy's line of sight. When the Spanish conquered the Inca Empire, Machu Picchu wasn't destroyed, not because it was spared, but because it was never discovered. The city was deliberately abandoned and swallowed by the jungle, while the world around it rearranged itself. This wasn't a collapse under pressure. This was a strategic disappearance. As a traveler, the feeling here is unlike anywhere else. No entrance prepares you, no city that eases you in. Suddenly you're up there, among terraces, stone structures, and views that feel both majestic and fragile. The architecture doesn't dominate the landscape. It follows it. Machu Picchu's history isn't a story of downfall, but of interruption. The empire disappears, the city falls silent, and time takes control. And that silence is exactly what preserved the place as we see it today. The beauty here doesn't come from resisting an attack. It comes from stepping out of history in time. The city that never had a choice. There's one more story that rarely makes it into tourist narratives. This place has been fought over, destroyed, and taken more times than any other point in Europe. Not because it was beautiful, but because it was inevitable. A place where two massive water arteries meet. Calm today, but for centuries, these weren't just rivers. They were army roads, collision lines, and borders along which history flowed so often that the water remembered more blood than reflections. For centuries, this wasn't just a city, but a position. A crossroads between worlds, a buffer between powers, a place where history didn't arrive as a story, but as pressure. Romans, Ottomans, Austro-Hungarians, Nazis, modern armies. If you haven't heard of it, it's not because it wasn't important, but because nobody turned it into a tourist legend. And yet today, there's no feeling of frozen past here. There's life. Sunsets over the rivers, music, bars, an energy that doesn't come from polished history, but from the habit of surviving and continuing. This is a place that doesn't try to impress. It simply exists, and that's exactly why it lasts. Its name is Belgrade. These destinations didn't become what they are because someone planned for them to be beautiful. They are what they are because they were put under pressure, choices, and time. And when you travel with that understanding, places stop being just stops on a map. They become stories you step into. This is TravelWise. Here, we don't just look for where to go, but why these places look the way they do, and why beauty is seldom an accident.